Thank you to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So here we have my sketchbook, just to briefly show you guys what we did. I think it was last Monday's sketchbook video where I did kind of like a real-time session of me kind of like talking about how I wanted to make some either OC Pokemon cards or like my own type of Pokemon cards, because I was in a very much like photocard making mood and I had the supplies technically to make my own Pokemon cards, so why not try to tackle that today. So kind of like off camera, I went ahead already to work on the at least rough sketches for 3 of the cards that we are going to be doing today. So I would have shown you guys the 3 rough sketches. So we had Masaki with Budew, we had the Chandelure one, which is what I am currently working on, and then our third one will be Kaisen and Haunter. So I'm gonna have a little bit of hindsight in terms of talking about the process because I have already completed the cards as I'm doing this voiceover. So we are starting off with Chandelure right now because he has no trainer or any of my OCs to draw with them. So I thought it would be a little bit easier for me to show you guys this process first, even though technically Chandelure was the second one that I ended up drawing, so I will have to kind of hide Masaki's card a little bit, even though you might see it in the thumbnail, but for at least the process-wise, I'm gonna hide Masaki's card for the beginning so you don't see the final illustration like right away, if that makes sense. So do check out, I think it was like last Monday's sketchbook video where I end up talking and yapping a lot about just Pokemon in general. I think it's like almost an hour long, if not longer, about me talking about either my relationship and like why I like Pokemon in general, as well as I talk about stuff about the behind the scenes, about the planning portion, or my thoughts about what I wanted to do for each of the illustrations. Minus Selwyn, I might do Selwyn in the future once I figure out a little bit more about the formatting and stuff, which we'll get to later on in the video, because I do run into a few problems or roadblocks, but we'll explain that a little bit later. So in terms of the process, I initially found, I believe, some sort of template for the cards. I have pretty much the exact dimensions, I would hope. I did size it up to whatever resolution, as well as the size with the same aspect ratio so that we could sketch out Chandelure and the rest of my other OCs all together to see whether or not, you know, I could match the cards a little bit more accurately. So right now you're seeing me sketch Chandelure for a second time. I will eventually scrap that and we're going to proceed with my current sketch that I have of Chandelure, because I was kind of debating between working on either going cell shading and or like line art for a more cleaner look, or do I want to go kind of more painterly, how I usually color, with doing base colors underneath and doing kind of like a merge with my sketch and then painting on top. So I ended up going with that route instead of doing the line art, but you'll see me do a little bit more like line work and much more of a cleaner approach once we work on the, I guess, like trainer plus Pokemon card, if that makes sense. So in terms for the coloring, I ended up doing the background first. Now I had a few ideas and I had a very specific color palette in mind, which I'll explain why I ended up choosing this, because it did not really cross my mind until something you'll see a little bit later on in this video about this kind of like color palette or this type of atmosphere. So I ended up going with my first idea for the background, because I end up going for like a lighter color palette and maybe doing more of like a cherry blossom road aesthetic, being almost like tunneled in by sakura blossoms and sakura flowers, but ended up not really liking it. And I think because I could not find or compile enough references prior to working on any of these illustrations for the background. So there's gonna be a different level of detailing for the backgrounds depending on what I was able to come up with and what I thought would fit each of the cards a little bit better. So my intention for the Pokemon cards was mostly, I wanted to do like full art. So one that was not like being cut off by borders at the very bottom, like taking up half the space of the card. I wanted something that would be more complete feeling, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit of the process of actually making the cards at the very end, but we're not going to go like super in depth, as I've made several photo card making videos in the past, so you can definitely check those out if you're interested. But if you want me to make more versions of these Pokemon cards later on, do let me know, and maybe I'll do a more in-depth portion into making the template and stuff, because I do have to adjust them at some point because I did screw something up, and maybe it'll be helpful to you guys in the future. So for Chandelure, my idea is that I wanted more of like a night scene. So Chandelure is a fire and ghost type Pokemon. He's one of my favorites. They're just color palette wise, I love just the general aesthetic of like Litwick, Lampent, and Chandelure. I just like, and I like ghost types a lot. Fire types, I'm like neutral about. I don't like super love them, and I don't dislike them. Obviously, I rarely dislike a Pokemon. There's like one on my radar, which I talked about, I think, on like last Monday's video for like a very stupid reason, but he is technically a Pokemon that I dislike. But for these like kind of like concept wise or theme wise, I wanted to do nighttime, but with a focus of like Sakura blossoms ish, kind of like in a pink purple aesthetic. They kind of complement a little bit of like Chandelure's own color palette. So Chandelure kind of fits more of like purple and blue, but to make him stand out or like have something, I think, more cutesy, a little bit happier, because I wanted him to be very cutesy, very happy, just hanging out in the night sky with all these beautiful flowers. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the color palette in a little bit, so I'll see you guys then. So the color palette for Chandelure's card was actually inspired by TokyoTreat and Sakuraco. Time to experience limited edition and seasonal snacks from Japan from the comfort of your own home with these lovely monthly snack boxes. TokyoTreat is a fun and exclusive monthly snack box that is packed with some of Japan's coolest and funnest treats. Each month, you'll get a Japan exclusive premium snack, a limited edition chip, and noodles. They always have like a very fun variety of snacks ranging from sweet to salty, even to savory, and a little bit tart or sour. And talking about the color palette, I honestly think that these are one of the prettiest designs for both of these boxes, as it's kind of connected to the night viewing for the Sakura season in Japan. While Sakuraco is a monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local snack makers across Japan, each box is carefully crafted with traditional and seasonal snacks that are hard to come by outside of Japan, like mochi, dorayaki, senbei, and even more. Because it is the Sakura season, I can definitely see a lot of like Sakura themed or flavored snacks, but it's more geared a little bit more towards like that nighttime viewing, which I really love. The box also includes a signature Japanese tea and exclusive homeware. So the homeware for this month is actually this very cute cup with this kind of like beautiful cherry blossom, translucent kind of flower look to it. And it states that it's actually perfect for beverages and desserts. And it kind of reminds me that I should probably try making a matcha tiramisu-like-esque dessert. And maybe I'll use this cup in the future. Both boxes come with a 24-page cultural guide booklet, and it includes information regarding ingredients and allergens of each of the snacks, but also informs you of little tidbits revolving around culture and traditions in Japan. I personally love the idea of seeing or viewing the Sakura during the season, but like experiencing it more from a different view, so experiencing it at nighttime. I feel like it's very elegant and something beautiful about it. Each month also has a different theme, meaning that you get to try out a whole new selection of new treats and snacks every month. For example, TokyoTreat's theme for the month of April is Sakura Night Matsuri, while Sakuraco's box is the Sakura Moonlight Festival. So I was super excited to try out this tea in particular. I was super surprised about the color. So my camera doesn't really do it justice, but it kind of started off with this slightly more darker green color. And then as you move around your tea bag or as it steeps a little bit more, this really beautiful pink color kind of like seeps out. So this is the ume pink tea, which is a very delightful, I guess, like tasting experience, because it is very much like a green tea, but it's also mixed with hibiscus and a little bit of that ume plum juice. So as for the snacks, I always enjoy a good matcha latte Kit Kat from TokyoTreat, but my favorite this time has to be the fried ume potato sticks. I love a good snack that is both kind of like salty and kind of tart a little bit. But as for sweets, from Sakuraco, the Sakura mochi was perfectly sweet for me, as it's not entirely too sweet, and a little bit of that kind of like Sakura floral flavor coming through is really nice. But I also really love the spring mix okaki, as it's a little bit more of like that assorted mix of traditional rice crackers, which is perfect for snacking. So if you would like to get a box for yourself or want to give these as a lovely gift to family or friends or your partner, then do check out the links in the description. Thank you again to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. So let's go ahead and finish up coloring Chandelure. So with the background out of the way, we can work on coloring just Chandelure themselves, and then after that, we'll move on to our next card. So like I said, the whole idea of using more of like a purpley pink aesthetic and kind of like setting Sakura at nighttime was mostly because when I received the TokyoTreat and Sakuraco boxes, I saw the outside of the TokyoTreat box and I'm like, I like pink and I like purple whenever I do like drawings, but I never really do ones that are a little bit more intensely that color very deliberately. So oftentimes if I'm doing anything that's like blue adjacent or pink adjacent, I will always do accent colors or darkening shadows, anything like that with purple. So purple is very prevalent, I feel like, in my color palette, and I've had I think I talked about this story back in like a previous convention. There was somebody who was like, oh, I really like your artwork. And I'm like, thank you so much for liking it. And then I think their mom was attending the convention with them and they're like, oh, I wonder what your favorite color is. I wonder if it's purple, because a lot of my drawings just had purple very prevalent in like the illustration. Even though purple is technically not my favorite color, I still love using it a lot and I like the general aesthetic of it. So ended up going with more of like a pink purple to make sure that Chandelure can kind of stand out. And I feel like pink, purple, and blue, even like if you lean more towards like a blue-green almost, that kind of like general color scheme I feel like is very easy to use, both like pastel or very like saturated dark midtones or very dark colors. It works for like evening skies, it works for kind of like that dreamy aesthetic, it kind of works for, I don't know, it works for so many different things depending on the intensity, and I know a lot of other color palettes can fall under that category as well, but I feel like this one's very comfortable and easy for me. So I definitely was kind of glad I ended up doing this one for Chandelure because I was kind of lost on what background I wanted to do, but that seeing the boxes just kind of like solidified what kind of aesthetic that I wanted, so it kind of made it a little bit easier for me to choose eventually. I'm kind of like back to talking a little bit more about like process-wise for this particular illustration. Now, unfortunately for, I guess, me, not much for you guys, you guys can kind of see it a lot more clearer than I can. So I don't know if it's the lighting in my room to make sure that things are properly lit. I was not able to see some areas for Chandelure very clearly, otherwise it will look overexposed on my camera. So I think there are some areas I was a little bit confused on what I wanted to make much darker and much brighter. So the shadows are going to look a little bit inconsistent, and places that I thought were kind of like flat, almost like a flat, consistent black color, was not. It was kind of like scribbly and a little bit messy, but luckily for the size that I print these at, which is hopefully the correct Pokemon card size, they don't show up too terribly unless you're like looking super closely. So for the most part, I think the process was like very straightforward. It's very much the same as my normal process. We do our rough sketch, then our clean sketch, we'll do the background, we'll do the colors underneath, and I think that's it. We'll add a little bit of an overlay, maybe a multiply layer as well, and that kind of completes the overall card in general. So even though I'm not like 100% happy in terms of how I painted Chandelure and kind of like certain aspects of the background, I still think overall the card actually turned out pretty cute. So I'm letting you guys see the time lapse very briefly before we move on to our very next card, which is going to be the start of 1 out of 2 of the kind of like trainer plus Pokemon card. So we are going to be starting off with Masaki and Budew. So I think a lot of you guys know that Budew is one of my favorite Pokemon. I think it's like super adorable and I love grass types, and Budew is like a baby Pokemon. So I think it's just like very cute and very round, very friend shape. So I love Budew a lot. But for when I was assigning Pokemon to my OCs, I think it was kind of like a no-brainer that I would assign Budew to Masaki because of the mouth shape is actually very similar. So I also think like Masaki's more cute and kind of has more of that nurturing nature and would probably be a Pokemon breeder. So, you know, being affiliated with either grass types for either, you know, taking care of Pokemon, growing, gardening, all that stuff to do self-sustaining stuff, or being part of like a Pokemon nursery type of thing, daycare, where he's taking care of like little smaller Pokemon like Budew, who's a baby Pokemon. But when I shorthand Masaki or draw him in my more like simplified derpy style or even like chibis, when he opens his mouth, I give him kind of like a heart-shaped mouth because when I draw his mouth closed, I will draw it more in like a V shape. And if you're familiar with Budew, Budew's mouth is also kind of like a long V shape or like a wide V shape. So at least to me, they resemble each other a smidge. So I often like drawing Masaki with Budew or kind of like smaller grass types or any grass type that I feel like would help with gardening and flowers and all that stuff. So let me go off on a little bit of a tangent. Or actually, let me talk about process first because we can get that out of the way because this is going to be a little bit more of the lengthier time lapse or section of the drawing along with Kaisen's. So let me talk about this first. So for slightly different approach compared to Chandelure, I am still doing a rough sketch, which you guys would have saw at the very beginning, and then I would consider this technically my clean sketch because I was initially sketching with the intention that maybe I was going to do it more in a painterly way, how I usually approach my drawings, by adding my clean sketch, and then underneath I would do all my colors, my rough colors, shading, all that stuff, and then merge the two and then paint over on top later. But instead, to kind of like keep things a little bit more simple and to make sure that coloring was less of a headache, because I feel like me wanting to do like the background art, including a Pokemon, doing hopefully not just like a normal headshot, I want to make sure that I don't get burned out too quickly when doing the drawings, especially because I know I have Kaisen's to work on as well. Ended up not going with using my clean sketch for our drawing process, I guess, in terms of finalizing the illustration of the drawing. We're going in with line art. So I am using a version of the 6B pencil, I believe. It has like a very similar-ish texture, but it's not as how to explain it? Like the lines aren't tapered by any means, and I feel like the line feels a little bit more solid. It does have like a high stabilization. I ended up changing it to 55, I believe, when I did the line work, but this is going to make it a lot easier for me to fill in flat colors as well as to keep my layers intact because I'll be able to drag and drop colors much more easily. But before that, we have to tackle the background. So if I know I want to include some sort of background to my illustration, whether or not it's for a character or not, I will almost always do it first because it will definitely affect the colors that I choose to either add to, let's say in this case, the character for Masaki and Budew, or other areas would be like, oh, some of the colors might be reflecting or bouncing off, and it's easier for me to think about that when I have the background already fully established. So I went ahead and did more of like a grassy field type of background. So in Monday's or like last Monday's video where I talked a lot about Pokemon, I don't really remember if I talked about technically the timeline. It might have been in a different video, but Ruby and Sapphire was like my first Pokemon game that I've ever played. So the daycare system and the aesthetic of it is very much like ingrained into my brain. So I wanted to do something similar in terms of like, you know, it's kind of like a fenced off area. It's like a more grassy terrain. So I wanted to do that for Masaki and Budew because I thought it'd be cute. And I gave Masaki kind of like a little berry basket, and I was gonna have him like look like maybe either he was collecting and picking the berries or he was about to go feed some of the Pokemon. And then we have Budew who steals a Pecha berry and it's kind of like jumping through the air is kind of the vibe of their card that I wanted to do for this. And I think in my sketchbook I had Budew facing the other way, which did not make sense because the way how Masaki is placed, I feel like it made sense, one, to fill up that area on the opposite side, as well as making sure that, I guess if he's jumping in a certain direction where the berry basket is, I think that general direction makes a lot more sense than him going to the left. Also, ended up just adding a few extra things at the very end by adding an overlay layer. I think I added a bit of a multiply layer to give a slight shadow to the left-hand side of Masaki, and I think that's about it. This process, for some reason, the background I think took me an hour and a half, so definitely took me the longest. So Masaki's card in general for like the entire time duration was probably 3-ish hours. The other two were probably closer to either 2 hours or like an hour and a half. It was much more quicker compared to Masaki's because I went a little bit crazy with trying to figure out how I wanted to do the background. But let's go ahead and move on to Kaisen. So Kaisen's, I think because we're following the same steps as Masaki, I ended up condensing a lot of the footage a little bit more compared to Masaki's process. So for the sketching, I did not keep things as clean or neat because I knew that I was going to be doing some sort of line work. So I did not have to, keep things clean because I knew I wasn't going to be using that to color everything in. We can be as vague or as scribbly and messy as we need to be, and then we'll lower the opacity and work on inking on top. So I think concept-wise, I did have like a vague idea for Kaisen and Haunter. So canonically, Kaisen is directionally challenged. He does get lost a lot. I feel like he's very poor with using the maps on his phone. He's very poor at using maps like physical maps, I guess, and just has no sense of direction. I feel like there's always some doodles in the past that I've already kind of like pinpointed or talked about the fact that Kaisen's not very good with directions. And I feel like there's a doodle that I've done where it kind of gave more like road trip vibe with Haunter. So that is kind of the concept that I ended up going for this one. So the sketches that I ended up doing from last Monday was, I think Kaisen was holding the map and Haunter is just kind of like cutting through. But I thought it'd be a little bit more funny and a little bit more interactive with the characters, I guess, in a way. Not exactly, but having Haunter have the map instead, and maybe Kaisen's like, okay, fine, I'll let Haunter lead the way, because surely maybe he's better at directions than Kaisen is, and maybe Haunter's just gonna have fun and, take a look at the map and see what he can do in terms of getting them back to wherever they're supposed to be going. Background-wise, maybe I'll link it in the description. I do have a Pinterest board for background inspiration from time to time, and I think I added the one that I was referencing to that background folder. And what I wanted was kind of like seaside-ish with a little bit of like cliffs, or not exactly mountains, so I guess it would be kind of like cliffs. And they're on kind of like the side of the road is the vibe that I wanted to go for, because I thought road trip, they could be, I guess, getting stranded somewhere and they're just gonna follow the road back to hopefully town. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to go with. Instead of giving like Kaisen the map in the background where I feel like it was just not gonna be as visible, and then having Haunter just kind of in the front being like, hey, I'm here too. So I feel like this makes him participate a little bit more with Kaisen in a way. I think I forgot to talk about this at the very beginning of when I did the rough sketches, which I did not show on camera. I did show you guys kind of like the finished results of those rough sketches. I did very vaguely kind of block out some black borders of where the edges of the cards would be, alongside where general text typically is for a full art card. So when I mean by full art, I mean the entire card has art like for the entirety of it. So non-full art cards, typically the bottom half of the card is like a nice thick border with the text and stuff, and you're left with a tiny rectangle in the upper half, which shows the illustration. So I wanted to make sure that hopefully nothing would be poorly placed. I want the Pokemon's face to be somewhat in view and in focus, but I'll show you guys what these will look like in the template in a little bit, but let's go ahead and go look at the time-lapse for Kaisen's. And while the time-lapse happens, I don't think I talked about this in this video if this is the first time you're seeing my OCs with Pokemon. So I would associate Kaisen with poison-type Pokemon, more typically Haunter and Vileplume, and then Masaki with grass types, so any tiny grass types. I've drawn like a lot of different grass type adjacent Pokemon with Masaki, so I'm not going to list them all. And initially I was going to also draw Selwyn, but I was like, I don't know if I want to draw 3 trainer with their Pokemon cards because it will take quite a while. And I thought it'd be fun to at least do one that didn't include like a human or a trainer. Oh, also, I'm going to show you guys a very brief glimpse of this. I made a very simple like back side of my Pokemon card. I didn't want to use the typical Pokemon card because I'm not trying to emulate it technically. And what I mean by emulating it, because we're using this template website or whatever, which is gonna make our Pokemon card actually look like a Pokemon card, which I think is quite neat. So I'm gonna fill out all the information for Masaki, and I kind of liked that they had so many options because there's so many things I would not have remembered or known about, including for a Pokemon card. So I went ahead and changed and added the said art from what we drew earlier to the template alongside with filling out the information. So I was cross-referencing and looking at other, I guess like for Budew's, I was looking at other Budew cards to figure out what moves I wanted to give Budew, as well as like the hit points or the HP, as well as like making sure the weaknesses and the resistance and the retreat were going to make sense and they were kind of like consistent across. Because not gonna lie, I've never played with Pokemon cards in the way that they were intended as a kid, if that makes sense. Like I was never into TCG, so I never really read too much about like the moves or whether or not like, you know, you need certain energy cards to play for certain moves or to retreat. In this case, I was like, I didn't really know there was a retreat option and that they require energy, so that's kind of neat to see. But while I was kind of like browsing other cards, I tried my best to hopefully not make any spelling errors, and we're just going to be basically copying some of the moves from previous cards of the Pokemon because I don't want to be making up random descriptions or thinking about certain names because I'm not super creative in terms of like thinking about those types of stuff. I'm very much more I feel like it comes to me a little bit more easily when it's like visual media rather than like storytelling or like thinking about those kinds of stuff at random, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm clearly scatterbrained. It's almost 2 a.m. But I ended up not recording the entire session for that. So this is what my template looks like right now. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be showing you guys how I made this template in particular. It's very much similar to my other photocard one, but because this one is a little bit bigger and wider, I was not able to fit 3 rows of 3. Instead, I ended up flipping them sideways and only doing 8. So the thing you have to remember is that the way you put your paper in, you should know how your paper comes out of your printer. So for me, putting the paper in this way will make all my cards face a certain way, but I have to flip it over in order to do the back side so I can print on that side. So I had to flip my back cards to be basically the opposite. I think I talked about it in previous videos quite a bit, but if you're flipping your page, make sure that your card designs are facing the right way and hopefully aligned. So right now I'm showing you guys what the cards look like without our laminate. So for Pokemon cards, I ended up going, because I ended up doing full art, I thought it'd be fun to make it a little bit more fun and take it kind of like a step further and use a hollow laminate. So this is the hollow rainbow laminate that I've used for stickers in the past, and adding that to the top surface of our cards. Making sure you're using a squeegee to get rid of any bubbles and all that stuff. This is very very shiny. And the holographic look to it, it's very neat. I actually quite like it. And on the back side, I ended up going with just a simple matte. Like, I think I mentioned in like previous video before that I don't own any Pokemon cards currently. I've not sold them. I gave them away when I was a kid because me and my brother used to collect them. And we had like a kind of like a childhood friend who was significantly younger than me and my brother. So when we grew up, we ended up giving a lot of like our Pokemon memorabilia to him because he was into Pokemon while we were like slowly not really into collecting anymore. So I kind of regret giving it to him, but I'm sure he loved them when he was a kid because we had a lot of like Pokemon cards. We had like very much those small toys and figurines that you would get at Walmart as a kid. And I miss those toys because I think they're so cute, and like I feel like they don't make them anymore. I'm not too sure. I've never visited the toy section in like a long time, so I'm not really sure if they still make them. But let me quickly talk about the template super quickly. So we already cut out our cards, and you can see that there's some marks on the back. For the back side of your cards, you can just get rid of your, what is it called? Your registration marks, your bleed marks, because you're not really going to need them when you're cutting your cards. Typically, you're cutting them from either pick a side, I guess, one either on the front or the back, but the other side wouldn't need your bleed mark registration lines. Now, the mistake that I ended up doing was the fact that I made my bleed lines cut into the cards, which was a poor decision. For the ones that I do with my photo cards, I have them only purely on the outside, which sometimes does make it a little bit more difficult when cutting because I can cut off my bleed line marks quite easily. But these ones, they're kind of like in the way, so some of the corners you can see a very little bit of the black peeping through. And then obviously on the back, the cards were not like perfectly aligned, which is why I don't really love doing borders for my photo cards. I usually just like doing some sort of design in the center so that the entire bleed has a little bit more wiggle room, because if it's misaligned by like a few millimeters, it's not very noticeable. But this one's like off for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 millimeters, and you can definitely tell because of the borders. I feel like I'm delirious at this point, but hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me make some Pokemon cards of my OCs alongside with Chandelure, who I love very, very much. If you want to see me make more Pokemon cards in the future with my OCs or not, do let me know, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!